Exactly.
One of the things we went over yesterday, which is a crazy number, we were looking at the amount of money that was accidentally sent to Ukraine. Like they oversent $6 billion. And then I said, well, how much would it cost to rebuild every house in the Maui fire? And it's $5 billion, $5 billion something.
Yeah.
Like that's just like accidental money. Yeah. But there's no talk of doing that. There's no talk of doing that. Isn't that interesting?
The way, and it's happened 2 or 3 times now where the Pentagon has said, oh, we miscalculated how much money we had set aside for Ukraine. So we have an extra $4 billion to send now that we didn't know we had. And this has happened a few times. Person after person was like, Tulsi, tell me what would happen if we started to call ourselves Ukraine. You think they would give us some money then?
All right, folks. Well, before we get into today's video, I do want to announce that we will be live tomorrow night, Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. I know I said we were going to go live tonight, but something came up. Personal emergency. Can't say what it is, but just know we will be live tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern time as your makeup stream. So with that out of the way, let's get into today's video. So RFK Jr. recently responded to the Joe Rogan clip we played for you there in the beginning by saying this, quote, the White House accidentally sent $6 billion to Ukraine, but pennies for Hawaii. And you certainly love to see, first of all, RFK calling out the leader of his party, sowing a little bit of dissent, a little bit of chaos within the Democratic Party and party line there. So, you love to see it on one hand, but on another hand, what he's saying is absolutely true. Right? The residents of Maui, who, as you know, if you remember what happened to them, they lost everything. Everything got burnt down. So they lost their homes. They lost all of the belongings inside their homes. They lost cars. You're talking in many cases losing millions of dollars worth of assets when you add it all up. And Joe Biden's federal government responded by sending, I'm not joking about this, sending them checks of $700. Because that's really going to fix everything, right? You just lost millions of dollars worth of belongings, but Joe Biden gave you $700. That is less than the COVID stimulus that half the country got in 2020. And the Biden federal government cannot afford more than that for a couple hundred people in Hawaii. Unbelievable. And of course, on the flip side, as RFK brings up, they accidentally sent $6 billion to Ukraine. As you know, the total aid package is something upwards of past $100 billion, I'm pretty sure at this point. I think to rebuild a couple hundred homes, you could easily do that with $6 billion. That's how much they accidentally send to Ukraine. Meanwhile, when American citizens literally lose everything, the government does absolutely nothing. But I'll tell you the worst thing about it, about what's going on in Maui and about the mistreatment there, is that when you consider the classical conundrum of why to vote Democrat versus vote Republican, right? The traditional dichotomy or trade-off that you are sold is usually, hey, either you vote Republican and pay less taxes, but the government doesn't take care of you as much. Maybe you lose a couple social programs or here and there, or you vote Democrat, the taxes are higher, but the government takes more care of you. That's sort of the divide I was taught in civics class and kind of the average American believed growing up. But folks, you now have the case that under the liberal president, under the Democrat president, Joe Biden, who, as bad as everything is, you are at least sold the idea on paper that you would think in situations like these, where you could use a little bit of quote unquote big government, you could use a little bit of government coming there to help you and bail you out. What has happened now repeatedly under the Biden administration? Nothing. They don't do anything. They completely leave you essentially to die on your own, whether that's East Palestine, Ohio. So this is not the first example, because you think back a couple months ago to East Palestine, Ohio. What did Joe Biden do about that? Absolutely nothing. Those people realistically probably are being exposed still to this day to toxic chemicals and ideally should be relocated and given the money to relocate. The federal government gave them absolutely nothing, told them it was safe to return to their homes, which I have serious doubts about that, and basically said, you're on your own. You want to pack up and leave? That's totally on you. And now you have this case that's even worse than East Palestine, where these people, everything they own was burnt to the ground. And what does Bidenomics do? Your Biden bucks? Here's $700 and one visit where didn't he make a joke about how his car was on fire once or something like that? I remember he did say something stupid, right? So you are getting the worst of both worlds, folks. You're voting for Democrats. Okay, a Democrat is president. So what that's doing to the economy and economic growth and inflation is kind of what generically the cliche is what people expect to happen. But you would at least think, hey, Democrats, big government, right? You know, in a case like this, maybe they'd be a little better. Maybe they'd send more money your way. Nope, absolutely not. Because both parties, I think, in Washington have discerned it actually is fiscally conservative when it comes to helping American people when they need it, but fiscally liberal when it comes to sending money to stupid Americans who don't need it, and very, very fiscally liberal, arguably fiscally socialist when it comes to funding Ukraine. And that's what RFK here is calling out, and you certainly love to see it. And I absolutely 100% agree. What I would point out, though, and why I'm giving RFK so much credit for this take right here, is that this is not just a shot at Biden. This is a take that, in my opinion, is better than most Republicans. Because the truth of the matter is that, you know, we have our Donald Trumps, we have our Tucker Carlsons. But most Republicans in this party, especially in the Senate, especially in the GOP presidential field, would not say something like this and are not willing to call out something like this because they are completely for all of this funding to Ukraine while Americans legitimately do need it. Right? You listen to Mike Pence. Heck, listen to him when he was on the GOP debate stage itself. He literally said that, oh, funding Ukraine and helping Americans is a false dichotomy. We can do both. Meanwhile, both are not happening. Meanwhile, there's very little evidence that we can do both. Meanwhile, Republicans on one hand, the establishment ones I'm talking about, of course, spend so much time talking about fiscal conservatism and how we need to balance the budget and cut people's social programs, which I'm not saying I don't entirely disagree with, but this is what we sell to Americans. Hey, cut social programs because we're fiscally conservative. But then on the other hand, this is what the non-Trump candidates say. Hey, when it comes to funding Ukraine, send all the tax dollars there in the world, because when it comes to funding other countries, we don't care about fiscal conservatism. We only care about fiscal conservatism and saving money and spending less money when it comes to spending money to help Americans. At the very least, RFK, why I'm giving him credit here, unlike a lot of Republicans out there, is at least logically consistent about this. And, you know, he did go on to say, and that's why I got to give him credit, because he's saying something a lot of Republicans, sadly, are too scared to say or just flat out disagree with. And he goes on here. He's been going on an absolute tirade this week against Joe Biden and, again, a lot of Republicans' foreign policy. Goes on to say, quote, 2022, President Biden said he was not prepared to provide long-range missiles to Ukraine, given the key goal of avoiding the road towards a third world war. So, as you know, last year, Joe Biden didn't want to send Ukraine long-range missiles that could strike into the Russian heartland because, as you could imagine, American-made missiles striking targets in Russian soil, of course, that is likely to provoke World War III. If Russia sent that to Cuba, and we know from history, tried launching that at the United States, which even they didn't do before, we know how we would react to that. And so obviously that makes plenty of sense. And 2022, Biden saying that made plenty of sense. But now, 2023, right? Biden administration preparing to send long-range missiles to Ukraine. Obviously, that needs to be called out. That is insane. That is a blatant provocation of World War III. But again, like I said, while RFK is completely right here, and I, as America First conservative, whatever you want to call me, agree, again, a lot of the contenders on that GOP debate stage are 100% in lockstep with Biden when it comes to sending these missiles to Ukraine. Heck, the accusation we've heard from Mike Pence and others has been that Joe Biden is not doing enough to help Ukraine, right? So that's something to keep in mind. RFK then goes on to say, I guess avoiding World War III is no longer a key goal. Did Biden change his mind, or has he lost it? Well, I think the truth is probably a little bit of both there. And then RFK goes on to say, let me explain why these missiles are perhaps the most dramatic escalation of the war to date. They will allow Ukraine to conduct missile strikes on Crimea and Russian territory. Goodbye, Crimea Bridge. Moscow would mount a massive retaliation. If you want to provoke a full-on war between Russia and NATO, this is exactly how to do it. And then he goes on to make a point that, look, RFK is a liberal, and I'm not saying I would ever vote for him in a primary because there are still key social issues that we disagree with. But again, this is something to me that I do completely agree with. He goes on to say, is President Biden so out of touch with the American people that he thinks provoking war with Russia is more important than restoring our economic prosperity, health, schools, infrastructure, farms, environments? And then he goes on to say, again, very good point. Are there any Democrats in Congress with the spine to oppose this lunacy? Are there any Republicans? The answer, Mr. Kennedy, in most cases is no, because Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell are completely in lockstep. Lindsey Graham cannot get enough of visiting Ukraine and saying all of that stuff. And so this, of course, is the issue. And again, like I said, do I obviously ever plan to vote for RFK? No. But he does kind of make me think a little bit about whether or not the idea of a left-right populist unity is possible. And of course, Vince, what do you mean by that? That's the most nerdy word I've ever heard you use. So basically, that idea is that the anti-establishment left and the anti-establishment right can come together to unite on certain things. Because obviously there are certain social issues that we fundamentally disagree with. But when it comes to defunding the military-industrial complex and ending the forever wars, the MAGA conservative and the Kennedy liberal completely agree with that. When it comes to fighting Big Pharma and their monopoly on American health and the FDA and all of that, again, we completely agree. There probably are other issues that we could at least work towards some type of bipartisan solution on, right? For instance, this is an RFK take that I absolutely agree with. For less than the cost of the Ukraine war, we could lift every single American child out of poverty. Now, do I necessarily probably agree with all of RFK's solutions to get there? No, but at least we can start in the same place. That's part of the problem with political conversation in this party is we don't even want the same things for this country, right? So it's an interesting thing to consider, this idea of a left-right populist unity. The problem, though, folks, the reason I would say it's really not possible at all is nothing to do with RFK. I certainly think that like a Republican like Trump could hypothetically as president come together with someone like an RFK and, hey, here's a compromise solution to take on the deep state or do whatever it is. The problem is that RFK is such a small minority within his own party that how can you have a so-called left-right populist unity when there is no populist left? There's no anti-establishment left virtually at all in this country. They are mostly united behind being the establishment. Obviously, there's your occasional RFK. Obviously, you have one commentator out there like, say, I don't know, a Bill Maher. But besides that, every leftist in this country, for the most part, is more than willing to toe the line of the establishment, and they're completely far gone, right? And not since 2016 Bernie Sanders have you really seen a sizable portion of leftists in this country at all that in any way oppose the establishment, because in many ways they have become the establishment, you know? And so that's the issue. While I hope, genuinely, I do hope that Kennedy becomes a growing influence in his party. I hope that there become more Democrats like him, because as divided as our politics are, and as much as, you know, I'm not this sort of for this fake unity, because unity and bipartisanship very often mean just kowtowing to the establishment, and I don't want that. It would genuinely be good because you need bipartisanship to get things done in Washington to some degree. It would be good if there were more Democrats out there like Kennedy that we could work with. Sadly, though, I don't really see that going anywhere, because you look at the support for Kennedy himself, I think he has more support among conservatives and Republicans than he does liberals and Democrats. And maybe I'd be totally wrong about that. Maybe when it comes to the polls, we're shocked and there's a lot more Bill Maher type liberals out there than we think. But something tells me that's not the case, right? So it is unfortunate. It is unfortunate that RFK in many ways has been so left behind by his own party. And in a way, you could say that we real conservatives, quote unquote, out there are kind of left behind by our own party. But, you know, who knows? Who knows, right? Anyways, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, let me know your thoughts on this whole Ukraine conversation in the comment section below. Especially let me know your thoughts on the whole idea of left-right anti-establishment unity, because I think it's an interesting thing to entertain. But like I said, I don't think it's that possible in today's Democrat Party. And I think RFK is actually going to brutally find that out primary season. But anyways, be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe before you go. And until next time, folks, Alpha Moves only. God bless. Have a very good day and peace.